Good
Okay,
attitude.
great. Well, welcome everybody. It's really nice to have you here for this Beyond Return. Where do we go from here? Conversation. I hope that this is going to be the beginning of many. Our hope is to do these weekly, and you know, I think for me, one of the motivations is that thinking about the future and futurisms in general tends to be a very undiverse place, and you know, the means by which we get to the future really matters, and we need to have everyone at the table thinking about how we got where we are and where we want to go and how we're going to get there, if we're going to do that together. So it's very exciting to start off with these. So just to introduce this topic, as everybody I'm sure is aware, the last 6 months has seen the world change under our feet in extraordinary ways. Some of these crises are old in form and some of them are new, sparked most recently by more murders by the US police of completely innocent African Americans. There are currently protests in every state of the United States of America. Moreover, across the planet, people have left shelter in place to protest in countries that span all continents apart from the very cold continent. And the entire planet is protesting what has been triggered by police brutality, but is actually protesting sort of deeper structural racism in the US and the world over, declaring in big letters outside of the White House that is now visible from space that Black Lives Matter. So, you know, of course, structural racism is something that's been around for our entire lifetimes and many generations before us. But tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how we got here, where we want to go and how we're going to get to where we want to go. And I'm really excited to have our two friends here. So I'm just going to introduce Mike and William for you because their life experience is extraordinary. So Mike, can you just stick your hand up, Mike, so everyone can see you?
Hi.
There's Mike. So Mike was incarcerated at 21, served 26 years, over 26 years on a double life sentence in California prisons. Mike is a founding member of Criminals and Gang Members Anonymous, which is an amazing group I can attest to. I've been myself. It's very wonderful. Michael now works for the law offices of Tracy Lum, and also as a professional development training for a school district. He's also a community leader, criminal justice chairman for the NAACP. What's that?
That's a great question.
Okay, it's a long question. Okay, and is a visionary voice for what comes next in our troubled nation. William Palmer, also extraordinary life, incarcerated at 17 for a robbery in ATM. William was shot at 15 times by a victim and off-duty policeman before serving 31 years on a life sentence. William's now working on systemic change with M.A.N.U.P, United Playaz, Uncuffed Project, Returned Citizens Troupe, the Real Justice Fellowship, whoop, whoop, All of Us or None, and a ton of other community projects. They have a podcast that's in the making. They're extremely active, fingers in all the pies. And also have like really wonderful values about what they hope to see for the future. And both of these people I have like personally just had such amazing experiences with, amazing conversations with, and tonight we are going to talk about replacing the existing system with a new order. Okay, so I want to be a bit careful about time. I've got 5 or 6 pretty deep questions for both of you, and so I think it's okay just to say that this is just the beginning. We're just stirring the pot. Don't worry too much. But I want to start off with a quick question about the past for you both. So both of you have been exposed to some of society's most challenging structural violences, not only racism, but also the violence of the carceral system. Can we just take a second to think about how we got to this moment? How did we get to this point in time where the entire planet, during a global pandemic, is out on the streets, resisting shelter in place, protesting structural racism in the USA?
I think I'll go first with that question because mine is historical and physical, and I'm sure Mike will be able to bring us more into a more psychological perspective. I believe that we got here since 1492 when Europe came out of its dark age and was being ruled through the Mediterranean region of Southern Europe by the Islamic Empire, our caliphate that went through many hands. I believe the Ottoman Empire was the last to hold it at this time. So when they came out of this dark age where they had been taught mathematics, how to build paved roads again, bathhouses, like all these things of civilization that the Islamic Empire had created and evolved and developed. They set out on what we know today as modern white supremacy. They subjugated Africa and colonized it. They named Africa after Africanus, who ran Hannibal out of Europe and chased him until they killed him. So I don't even feel comfortable calling myself an African because that's after a general that had no concept of the motherland. So I'm a child of the motherland. Christopher Columbus set sail over here, not in search of a new world, but the new world that others have found. It's written in his diary, so this isn't some fantasy made up by, Black nationalism or Black movements. And so they wanted to come and do the same thing to the new world that they did to Africa, subjugate it and colonize it. And it was supposed to be the new United Europe. Every country that wanted to participate was going to come over here and use the resources. So when they came over here and found the First Nations here and tried to enslave them, and that didn't work, the next best things was those of the children of the motherland. And they found them to be some of the best subjects to slave. So the whole idea of race soon came about with Dr. Samuel, who decided that we were going to use the size of the cranium by filling it up with pellets to decide who was the smartest. And thus this race myth came about. And this myth gained teeth and claws, and it became a part of our institutional structures. Our beliefs and narratives have been created around it. And until we recognize it for its collective delusionment, then it might as well be real. So the first thing that I wanted to ask us or to suggest to us is to get rid of the color system. No longer identify yourself as white, black, brown, red, or yellow. These are the foundations to modern day racism, and we should see ourselves as nothing but human beings as citizens of the United States of America. Other than that, why do we need any type of label? So based off of the slave system of the United States, that's how I became a slave in the modern day plantation for 31 years and 22 days, and even at that time, they didn't want to let me free because they knew that I had learned to read and write, and a person of that type of intellect of himself in world history would be more dangerous than someone who was a gangbanger and never learned anything. They could release him back out on the street because they can enslave him once again.
Yeah. Powerful, yeah. So for you, it's about removing the marker that separates us all. Mike, where did you go? Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Absolutely, done a phenomenal job at just laying out the groundwork of how we got here. When we look at our country, not just our country, when we think about the United States, we see the United States as a global leader. Most, the power of the United States has allowed it to be a place where the rest of the world looks to the United States to pattern themselves behind. So as a result of that, that's one of the reasons why we see the uproars across the globe, because the same system that was developed in the United States was spread throughout the globe. And so where racism and that white supremacy may have been apparent in the United States because of slavery, it spread throughout the globe. So when we think about the system and the establishment of the system, we always say that the system is broken. It is not broken. It is doing, and it has done exactly what it was created to do. And that was to keep a foot on minorities or anyone of color. It was to promote white supremacy. So we're at this place now because there's a progressive nature to this destructive disease. It's progressive. And that progression showed itself as we watched this man feel comfortable and justified to kill George Floyd in front of all of us. He knew that he was being cameraed, but the illusion in his mind, this God complex, didn't allow him to see that consequences would affect him. So all right-thinking people had an opportunity to sit still due to COVID-19 for a moment. So we were all restless, observant, and maybe very highly in tuned to our own self-introspection as a result of sitting still for this amount of time, being, stalked by this disease or this ailment that no one can see, taste, hear, or smell. And the natural things that happens to a human being when you're being threatened is you have fight or flight. Most of us couldn't fight it. So we were running, which means that our senses, our awareness was keen. Our sense of hearing, sight, our intuition was keen as a world. And we end up watching this event happen. We have seen countless men get killed on national TV. We saw the young man in Chicago get shot 16 times while just walking. And that didn't move us to what we're doing now. We watched a man get choked out selling Lucy's. And that didn't move us to this time. The only thing that changed was our own individual awareness because of our sitting still and being self-introspective at this time with COVID-19, which was, I believe, a divine intervention. And then we got a chance to be exposed to the atrocities that we dealt with for years, for centuries. And enough is enough. And so now we're at this place to where no one can say that the room doesn't stink. And, any of us, if we walk into a room, the room is only going to smell for 5 minutes if it stinks in there. After 5 minutes, it's still going to stink, but you're not going to notice it. Because we've habituated ourselves to it. Same thing with the violence in our country and across the globe. We have become habituated to it. But COVID-19 and that rest time, that moment of self-reflection that we needed, has heightened everyone's awareness. And most right-thinking people are going to respond the way that we're responding right now. And that's why we're here right now. That's how we got
it. I think, that's interesting. I am interested. I'd love to hear maybe later on how this relates or how this compares this moment in time to previous race riots that you have both been present for. Does this feel like different to you?
It most certainly does. I've lived through, as most of us on the screen, through, I think, my first real acknowledgement of social racism and the abuse of the system. Even when I saw it happen, I too still didn't really identify with it. And that is the Rodney King incident. We sat there and watched cops beat this man to the inches of his life, and we didn't do anything as a collective. How? And then all the numerous ones before that. So as those who are labeled Black, we look at this and go, damn, he must have did something bad, or he knew better to invite the cops to do that, or why he just didn't lay down. We have these talks with our sons and our male counterparts, like, man, either run or just lay down. Even I was told by the slave, with my interaction with the slave catchers, which is the parole department, keep your head down. Don't give them no reason to notice you. I am noticed. I'm noticed because I was born to be noticed. I'm noticed because I got out of their slave camp through their court system, and they hot about that. I'm noticed because I can save millions of other people from going through what I've gone through. I'm noticed and I'm hated, and all I had to do was to be born for that, let alone the things that I've done. So the change that I feel in this one is the new generation is saying enough is enough. And it is, when I've walked through the streets of San Francisco, I felt unwelcome, just to be blank, honest, and straightforward. When I provided security for the United Playaz for the march that we had a couple of days ago, I saw an array of San Franciscoans, if that's what you want to call them, out on the street cheering and professing enough is enough, I'm with you. And I was just like, what part of San Francisco is this? And that is why I feel that something can change. And I believe that this is the age of the slave. Those people like me and Mike that have come out of slavery with a consciousness of love first, knowing that this is a shift in power, that some went to sleep one day and woke up with a change. And this isn't going to blow over. And those who are woke, the world is awoke. And this has to be what it looked like when we went from being occupied by Great Britain to being occupied by the southern states of racism and slavery and all the changes. But this time, we're going to do something that hasn't been done. We're going to create a system that's based in love. And that's the difference. We have learned how to self-heal. And like I said before, this revolution is not going to be in the streets, although there may be some incidents. It's not going to be televised, although you may hear some things. It's going to be with inside. We're going to have to go deep and get out of the toxicity that white supremacy has infected every single member of the United States and the world. And that goes for everybody. We're going to have to go through a cleansing, a spiritual, mental, psychological, heart cleansing, and be willing to do this openly and ask for help and questions and so on and so forth. But before we can even talk about the structure and how it's going to be built on love, we have to go through this process.
Yeah.
You know, no one has been immune to the effects of white supremacy. No one. It's impossible for any of us to be immune to it. I know that for me, my personal experience, in my life, I could be in the right, but my reaction to it would make me wrong. And most people would pay more attention to what I would do as a reaction to what was being done to me, that they would forget what was done to me. And so over time, it became to where I was my own worst enemy because of how I reacted.
Right.
I had an affinity, a takeoff bell for me, a bell that told me that it was time to fight, as if you called me the N-word. I didn't know any other response. I was habituated like you would train a dog, sick 'em, and that dog goes into a different mindset. I was trained in that same type of way to respond in a particular way. I didn't think I had a choice. It wasn't until I learned self-control and that I didn't have to respond, but it took time to learn this. And it took certain people to expose me to myself. I believe that the reason why this is not going to be a status quo event is because most of us have learned how to respond in a different way. We're not just propelled to violence or to burn things up, although that was a necessary requirement. It was necessary for creating negotiating power. I'm against looting and destroying a property, but I know that life is more important than property. And sometimes, if you don't give me any other abilities to communicate, then I only communicated with these. And so that's all you was going to get was my hands and my fists and my feet and my frustration, because I felt like I didn't have a voice. The greatest thing that we have going for us now, just like when we earned the right to vote, was we had non-blacks who were just as offended. Those who are non-black, have stood up too.
Yeah.
We needed them.
Yeah, actually, I think Tahazi Coates has a nice article out at the moment, which is basically saying the same thing, which is this is a multi-racial, multi-ethnic solidarity movement. People of all flavors, of all parts of the world, are all completely outraged, and everyone's ready for change. But I think this leads me to a question I have, which is, given that this is such a diverse movement, that everybody has reached the end of their tether for our sort of racist society, something I am seeing a lot of out there is white guilt, bystander effect, and a lot of infighting and sort of culture war between probably some of the most privileged groups, where it has become harder and harder to sort of set a foot forward without stepping on somebody else's foot. There's a lot of tension, and I think this is important in lots of ways. There's a lot of important information coming out about whose voices to listen to and who should not be taking up space and things like that. I think that's very important. But we talked, the four of us talked previously about the role of guilt and shame. And both of you have done a lot of deep work in your lives thinking about past actions and becoming different humans. And I wondered if you had anything to share for the many of us who are suffering from the guilt of living and benefiting from white supremacy, and carrying that guilt and trying to turn it into something useful now.
One thing I wanted to say when we start with this subject cannot be said in like 2 minutes or an hour or two, but the first thing you have to do is just forgive yourself. Mm-hmm. You have to use this moment of silence and stillness that, like you said, coronavirus or COVID-19 has granted us, to be still with oneself and go inside and forgive the trauma that white supremacy has laid upon you. You're not guilty of that. You were born into it. You're not a part of the forefathers of this country who signed their name on the Declaration of Independence, knowing full well what they were getting ready to unleash onto the world, which was the trauma of white supremacy. So you have to forgive yourself. I forgave myself for going to prison. I forgave myself for many bad decisions that I made. Like he said, I learned to fight before I learned to flight. I never knew about flight until I forgave myself. I just started to flight now, trying to avoid situations that would put me in situations that would cause me to go back to prison or stop me from pursuing my purpose in life. But some of the things that you're going to be facing is like false compatriotism, like, oh, I'm Jew or Muslim or lesbian or trans. And so I was someone who grew up in poverty, so I faced the same oppression or issues that African Americans do. You don't need to like compare your trauma to someone else. You just need to heal yours. Yours is just as painful and traumatic to you as someone else's. So it's not trying to identify with Blacks or African Americans or feeling these feelings of legalizing them. Like, I know what it looks like, you know, that a cop shot your child, but we need to wait until all the facts are in. So some of these sound bites of racism and white supremacy will come up. But I think today we are more familiar with realizing these things, are coming conscious of these verbal cues that go off in our head. And so when you talk about white shame or white guilt, it is so complex that we're going to need another show for that. And there are many things that are laid out to help you with that. But the first thing I would just suggest is just a sense of forgiveness, and start that journey of recognizing that you are a human being, and that love and kindness and mercy that we want to have for ourselves and extend for others is the first process in healing from the trauma.
Absolutely. I think about, as we learn better, we do better. And one of the things that happened in my life, and guilt and shame was what I ran from. It played a role in most of the decisions that I ultimately made, because I didn't know how to feel and want to feel guilt or shame. So as I was traveling through my life, I developed coping strategies and coping skills to avoid feeling guilt and shame. That was my whole goal. That was why I went to drugs. That was why I went to crime and violence. I felt ashamed of being poor. I felt ashamed of being impoverished. And so I would go and I would try to compensate for that, which eventually caused me to do people wrong. And then I would start feeling guilty. And then I created this cycle to try to avoid feeling guilt and shame. What happened for me to kind of like turn this light on is I finally allowed myself to experience it. But I also want my friends. I've talked to a lot of my friends, my white friends, my friends who don't necessarily identify themselves as white, but they are just non-Black, right? And so, and many of them have talked to me, and we've had some conversation. And I told them that you're not accountable. You're not responsible for what someone else has done, but you're now responsible for taking back your mind, for taking back your brain, your activity of your limbs, and how you utilize your time. So guilt and shame can be replaced with accountability. Accountability takes over that, but we can no longer use denial in order to avoid feeling the guilt and the shame. And like William said, it's going to take us some time to discover this subject. This subject will play a big role. It can be the difference between whether or not someone continues in this path, because the experience for a non-white right now can be very traumatic, just as traumatic as it has been for a black man living in America all this time.
Mm-hmm.
Because now the covers have been pulled. Many of my friends never thought they didn't never think that racism was really real. And it wasn't because they didn't think it was real. They just hadn't had any experience with it.
Right.
They just hadn't had any experience with it. So how could it be real for them? And so it was important for them to sit still and sit in this moment and allow themselves to feel the guilt and shame, and to cry, and to reach out and connect and ask for help, to ask for understanding, to develop empathy for those who have experienced it all this time. And I guarantee you that as they travel through this, they're going to gain a more awareness of how they have been oppressive to someone else, or biased towards someone else. And many times our biases are shaped by our experiences, and they seem subtle, they seem acceptable, and they do produce the guilt and shame once everything is being revealed. And right now that time is happening for most Americans. I know that for myself, I've allowed myself to hurt people. And while I was hurting them, I never thought I was wrong. There was not a single time where I took something from someone and knew that I felt justified. I felt like nobody gave a damn about me. Why should I give a damn about anybody else? And that theory of hurt people was true for me. And so my hurt, my pain didn't allow me to feel for someone else. And so what I was doing, I felt justified. When the light turned on for me and produced guilt and shame, I felt hurt. I felt the pain that I inflicted. And as a result, it helped me reshape my choices and my values. Right now, we're at a redevelopment of value stage in the world. Everyone has to go back and look at what values they have. How do they view people? And why do they view them that way?
One of the questions that came in before we move on, because it pertains to this, is how do we know the difference between white saviorism and leaning into advocacy? The difference between white saviorism is this. Like, I used to see Africa, right? And we see these starving kids, and there's always these white people going over there fixing the problem. Bill Gates going over there fixing the problem. He only made it worse. We won't get into that though. But white saviorism is just that. You don't need to go fix Africa. You just need to tell your counterparts, stop going over there and fucking it up. See, that's the problem. And I don't mean to curse. I'm sorry. Hopefully my mom ain't watching. Mom, you ain't that. Okay, but you need to go talk to your white bosses. You need to go talk to your white church leaders. You need to go talk to your white parents. You need to go talk to your white folks and tell them to stop. Let's have this discussion about what we are complicit in. Why we keep looking the other way, why we don't think this exists. How do you enslave people and think that something is not wrong with that? How do you come out of slavery through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, lynching, brutality, a slave plantation that has over 50-60% of Black and brown people in it? There were all white people in jails and prisons during slavery. As soon as slavery ended, it became full of Black people, and then they were identified out into corporations, which we still have today. How can you look the other way and say that this doesn't exist and that we are not implicit in this? It's because we are turning a blind eye. We are still electing Democrats and Republicans. No offense to any of you that might be that. But Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, they enacted crime bills that put more Black people in prison. Why do you want my vote? Trump, Bush, and even our most beloved Obama. They are still a part of the two-party system, the Yale and Harvardites that are elected every cycle. Well, I want to change that. We're going to open this up to all universities, all schools, all people. The party of the labor of love. It isn't about where you come from and when you were groomed to be president. You keep white supremacy going. So we need to have these conversations with owners of football teams, of university, heads of university. these institutions of white supremacy that have been instituting these policies for centuries.
Absolutely.
This is where the conversation that white people can have. And when you see a white police officer beating up a black person, be the first one to step up and say, that's wrong, boom. Call the DA. Don't say, oh, that black guy, what did he do? So this is the process that white people can have as speaking up. And this process is even for blacks and browns and yellows. I want to get out of this terminology, but because we know of this as the terminology, I'm only using it for this sake. But human beings of all hues have to go and have conversation with themselves. And this might offend someone, but the old guard has to go. And this includes black organizations that still have the word Negro in it, black in it, colored in it, and African American. We have to take those white racist, white supremacy terminologies out of our organizations, because that means you're still a part of white supremacy, even though you so-called working for your own. It is deeply rooted and has infected all of us through every fiber of our being in society. This cleansing, and I don't want to go long, but I don't have to say this. The cleansing was another question that was asked. This cleansing, and I'm going to use a biblical reference because of the society that we live in. We all should know something about the Bible. So when Moses went to the Pharaoh, he said, let my people go. He didn't ask them, can I change Pharaoh's system? Can you adopt these laws so that my people can be more cool in your system? No, he said, let my people go. And then when he crossed them over to the Red Sea, this is the symbolism that all the tribes had a fountain to drink out of. This water is a purification. You only get purified by two things, water and fire. I ain't up with the fire. So give me a drink of water that's clean and doesn't involve the toxins of white supremacy. So then they moved to the wisdom of the Red Sea, which water symbolizes as well, into this new land. And the old guard fashioned this golden calf. And when Moses saw this, he was like, I did all this work for y'all to still practice the oppression of your oppressors. You're going to use the same taxes that they use now on your people. So instead of taking 40 days to get to the promised land, it took 40 years to make sure that the old guard was dead and gone and the new, young, fresh minds that was coming to take over and institute this new promised land can do its job. I don't know where I fit in, the old or the young. I feel pretty young, but I may just be a bridge. I may just be a tunnel. I may just be a rope that's connecting, and I may not see the promised land. I don't mean to quote Martin Luther King, but I don't have a problem with that. My name is Tadic, which means bright piercing star that comes out in the darkest times of the night to guide people with light. So that may be it, you know, but that's what we have to do. And so this isn't going to be tomorrow. This isn't going to be next year, our next election cycle. This is going to be generational. We're going to have to get rid of everything and start over. So we went from the Articles of Confederacy to the Constitution. Now we're going to need a new document. We're going to need a whole new document that starts off with everybody being treated fairly as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I just want to share one thing that's helped me spot this like white saviorism a bit, which is, you know, I think saviorism is like assuming you know the solution to somebody else rather than being like, hey, we have a problem here because you don't have any water. You know, it's like, oh, you know, it's assuming the solution. And also, I think a little bit of maintaining the power dynamic, which is like, oh, now you're dependent on me for the solution rather than. So those are things that I've noticed that I can pick up on. William, I think that's really powerful. The thing you said, you know, like that none of us consented to this world, right? We were born into it. Some of us have benefited from the system that we didn't consent to, and it's going to be and therefore have reproduced it and made it very difficult to see. But I think the question is like, how do we become people who are ready for this new world that we want to live in, right? How do we qualify to be in this world with you know, the labor of love party, where we don't have to label ourselves according to weird sort of phenotype features that don't seem to bear actual importance in many ways. And I think so. I also want to quote Martin Luther King: a social movement that only moves people is merely a revolt. A movement that changes both people and institutions is a revolution. And you know, so I think we have seen the chasm is opening up, and we need to fill the space with something. And I think, you know, this has been something that we've been struggling, the sort of like the Black Lives Matter movement has been something that we've had to struggle so hard against that it's not clear what we're for. And we talked in our call about how there's just such a lack of visions of what sort of like post-racial utopias look like, because, you know, there is like so little representation in the media, in sci-fi stories, in, you know, in the movies, of what our world could look like, and we have to sort of envision that together. And I guess my question for both of you now is that I know you're both very well versed in restorative justice. You've done a ton of work in transformative justice, some of that with me, and I wonder what skills we can take from these kind of principles of transforming the sort of in situations of harm on an individual level to a national level. Do you think there's any role to play for transformative and restorative justice in deep societal transformation?
You know, I like to echo something that William expressed. Is it's very difficult for any of us to not have been woven. Many of our thought processes have been woven by white supremacy. And so when thinking of even about the concept that we know today about restorative justice, we have to go back and really go visit and see how much of that has been tainted as well. And so I know that for myself, I have to start off first with love and relationship. Love and relationship will be what has to propel us into the future. That has to be at its core. And first, do no harm. Starting off with first, do no harm, but we have to dismantle the current structure. And when I think about restorative justice tells me that crime or violence happens as a result of a severed relationship. And so, like William mentioned earlier about the revolution not being televised, it's going to be a revolution inside of each person. Each individual has to take on the responsibility of going inside of themselves and asking themselves, what have I contributed? How have I contributed to the destruction of our communities, of our nation? And eradicate that, forgive ourselves of that, and then begin to move forward, building new relationships, allowing ourselves to interact with people who don't look like us, think like us, they are not us. You know, accepting that we all have our uniquenesses and we need those uniquenesses in order for us to develop a more the utopia that you mentioned. For me, I've had a hard time envisioning, you know, a future like that because I may not see the promised land. I know that I play a role in us getting there, but I may not get a chance to see that, you know. But the role that I play today is building relationships and showing love and giving love to those that I'm around and those who I'm in contact with and those who I can reach, and speaking a word of truth and correcting a wrong when I see a wrong.
Yeah.
True. What we're experiencing right now is what we call, you know, dirty pain. And this is because it's been institutionalized as, you know, this white.
Is there a whistling noise in the background? Can anybody else hear that?
No.
Nope. Okay. I think it's.
Yeah, I hear it.
You can hear it. I think it's coming from your.
From me?
Yours. Yeah. But anyway, keep going. Keep going. No, don't mute yourself.
So this thing that we call dirty pain that has become institutionalized as this white body supremacy in our government's course, policy, education, empowerment. Why I can see a difference or moving past this is because I've never wanted to be a part of what was there, you know. So it's easy to see moving past something that never worked for me. But it's going to be difficult for those who it worked for to move past this and to see, like, what am I going to give up something that, you know, I hold dear? So it comes to also, we are bred to be consumers, materialistic, holding on to things that are going to be passed off to somebody else when we pass away. There are certain things that we can have among us or for ourselves that are intangible but are more important, like integrity and accountability and responsibility and courage and love. These are the things that we have to develop inside of ourselves that will break the chains of white supremacy and all of the trappings of it. Why do I need $1 billion if I'm just going to put it in my bank or buy a sports team or buy a numerous of cars? Like, is that really fulfilling you? And maybe it is. So if it is, if you got $1 billion and that's what you're doing with it, more power to you. But I've done more with less. You know, I have pennies in the bank account, but I live a fulfilled, adventurous life. I live in the most richest, expensive cities in the world, and I still am happy and want for nothing. And I don't make 6 figures. I barely make I barely make 5 figures, you know, but the thing is that it's what are we willing to give up, you know, and that's the part of the purification process. And if you're not willing to die, and I don't just mean a physical death, but I mean a death of loss of this stuff that we need storage containers for, that we need, you know, all of this room to hold all of this stuff. If you're not willing to die the death of materialism, then you will be willing to live with it and the consequences of it and all the trappings of it and all the toxicities of it. So when we look at the greatest men and women that ever lived on the earth, they took time to themselves and got rid of things that tied us down, that weighed us down. And they lived with the least as possible. And this may be an action that is required just for us to filter out and to remove all of what is keeping us blind and to open up that third eye. There's a mark on my forehead that many people see, and it's through decades of praying. And in order to wake up your third eye, there's going to be a submissiveness and a humbleness that has to take place, that you aren't the smartest person in the room or the world or the city. Like there's something greater than you that you need to surrender to, and whatever you call it and however you practice it. And in that process, you will start to feel as part of the universe, as part of the creation. And another reason why I talked about us being human beings, because in Islam, Allah said, kun fayakun, and that means be, because all he had to do is think of it, be, and it is. So we became beings. The creation became a being moving. So whether you believe in the Big Bang or whatever, there had to be an unmoved mover that started this process of creation and reproduction. And that's who we are. We are a creation and moving. What do you want to move towards? And if we know anything about the universe is moving into a center, and everybody's folding in onto itself. And that's what we're doing. We're moving into a whole new age of astrology where all the planets are all lined up. And if you're not with that, if you're not in tune with your universe, the one inside, the one outside, you're going to run into a comet or something probably. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Apparently, William, if you turn down your microphone, the whistling will stop. Yeah, I think that's really right. So I think what I hear here is that, like, you know, we need to look, if we really want to be ready for this next world that we're trying to get to. And it's, you know, like the protests have been extraordinary. I think the protests have been even bigger today than they have, you know, they're not getting smaller, they're getting bigger. So the disruption is happening. But if we want to be ready for what comes next, we have to look inside. And I think one of the things that has been really extraordinary to me, I've never seen anything like this. My social bubble's reaction to this has been to start reading groups and to share information, and to start listing Google Docs of like how to be a good ally, how to unshackle yourself from white supremacy. I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my life as a reaction to a sort of societal breakdown. And maybe that's not true of everybody. And certainly if anyone's looking for those resources, there's just so many good ones going around right now, and posting really great things like, hey, white people, this is like, you know, my challenge to you is to go and talk to a white friend this week and ask them these questions, like really like wonderful kind of active steps. So maybe one of the things we can do is rally some of those resources. And then the other thing I heard you both saying is that not just looking inwards, this is, you know, if we're going to do a sort of restorative justice style moving forward, we also have to look at the broken relationships. And I think San Francisco is especially bad for this. We just do not live lives in common. We live such segregated lives. And it's so easy to dehumanize people who are not in and around your space. And, you know, I'm very grateful to have both of you like living sort of entwined lives with me, because San Francisco is a very difficult place to have, you know, people from different walks of life. So I think that's something tangible that people can do, is to go and build your lives with, you know, look around in your circle and see who's missing, why are they missing, what are the conditions that are preventing there from being other kinds of people around you, and like go and build that life. You know, I think that's a really tangible thing that people can do going forward.
And so before we
Yeah, go
move
ahead.
forward, before we move beyond this, I think that one of the things that I've come to understand, and that we may want to consider, is that when we go to a position with a broken arm, the first thing they're going to do is hurt us to help us. Before we feel any healing, before we feel any calm, or you know, the growth or just the healing process itself begins with pain. And so we have to be willing to endure the pain. We have to be willing to endure the discomfort and the not knowingness. I remember when I started changing as an individual, when I began to become myself, I was very uncomfortable. I had no idea what it was going to look like in my life, what I was going to look like when I let go of certain things. And I had to be okay with that nothingness, with that open space. And it was very challenging. I actually used the flies to help me manage myself. I used to sit on a yard, and I had friends of mine, and we would sit there and we would allow flies to land on us. And the goal was to let a fly land on you without you shooing it away. And you know, you could feel this little material, this thing on you, and it was like tickling you, and you wanted, a natural inclination is to shoo it away. But I needed to learn how to manage myself. And so the goal was not to shoo it away, to endure it, and to imagine that it was an emotion or it was a thought that I'm used to acting on, but now I'm choosing to not act on it. I'm looking at it and I'm studying it, I'm feeling it before I do anything. And so I was actually regaining the ability to make a choice again, because most of my choices were so spontaneous that I was just reacting from my life and from my experiences, what I've been trained to do. As a society, we may want to consider doing this, finding ways how not to react so quickly, because most of our reaction and responses have been inbred to us. And so when we're developing our relationships, when we're developing our friendships and those that we feel most comfortable around, we have to allow ourselves to let go of that comfort and be willing to endure those uncomfortable spaces and interacting with people that we may not feel comfortable with. I can remember the first time that I was working with a gentleman by the name of Richard Mexico. He helped me, saved me from me. I can recall a time where I went to him and I told him, man, something's wrong. Something is wrong, man. I don't know what it is, but he said, hey, do you owe anybody? I said, no. He said, is your family okay? I said, yeah. He said, you know, is you in conflict with anybody on the yard? I said, no, everything is good. He said, well, Mike, man, you might be experiencing peace. And I was like, damn. See, I had no reference point for peace. All my life I had been in turmoil. I was bred with a bounty on my head, but I was experiencing peace and it was foreign to me. And so it felt like conflict. I needed someone outside of me to point to me and say, man, that's peace. And now I can identify myself. I know what it is. I preserve it. I protect it today. But I needed someone else to tell me what I was experiencing because I had no experience with it. So other human beings that we encounter today, they may need us to help point out what they're experiencing, what they're feeling. You may need someone else to tell you what you're experiencing. We may have to go through a period of nothingness because right now what we've had no longer works. It's never worked except for a few. But those who I feel the most sadness for and I know are going to have the most struggle It's like something that Esau said. He said that it's going to be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into this kingdom that we're looking to create. So those who have been the most affluent they're going to be the ones who are most constructive in trying to distract and destroy what could potentially grow. And so it's going to be important for us to grab those that we know are affluent, and hug them, hold them, and walk with them and tell them it's going to be okay. We can't shun them. We can't isolate them, and we can't let them isolate themselves if we have the ability to do that. We have to hold them and pull them close and say it's going to be okay, because they're going to be afraid. And they'll turn that fear into anger, hatred, and they'll use their influence, which is that money, to try to offset the goals that we're setting, to make themselves our enemies again. And so there's things that we can do, that we should do, but it starts with us as individuals first, and our relationships with people.
And just so when he talked about the eye of a needle, many of us get this conjured thought of a needle like a sewing thread needle, right? So it's impossible for a camel to get through that. It's obvious, right? But that's not what a needle in this reference is. A needle in the tradition of biblical and African times is this 3-ring market. So the first ring has a door, anything can pass. You can load up your camels and elephants and even your giraffes to the top and get through that front door. The second needle is a little smaller, but that intimate, that center where all the money's at, the door was so small, you had to get off, unpack, and go through that so that you couldn't run in and run out with the loop. So all of this has a different meaning for it when you actually know what that needle is, when you're talking about rich men getting into this new kingdom of righteousness. It's also keeping out the thieves and setting up a society to where we are truly righteous thinkers, loving thinkers, people who are safeguarded. So I'm not a violent man, but I do protect myself by all means necessary. And I don't hate people, but I do hate institutions that people create that are racist and is part of white supremacy. So we have to, this is a part of the evolution of cleansing the mind of what we've been taught to be real and start to really study. So you may have to read books that aren't by writers that you would normally read. Like I was forced to read a lot of books that made me uncomfortable that were written by white people for white people. You may have to start reading books that's written by black people for black people so that you can really get a grasp of what's going on and how to understand a new reality. But the conditioning of the mind that Mike has talked about, we as lifers had to go through it. Those who didn't have life and was getting out in a year or 2, 10 or whatever, they were able to program, do whatever they wanted to and get out. But we had to go through program after program after program, decade after decade. And if we just miss one thing, oh, you don't have enough insight, oh, you don't show enough remorse, this and that, even though it was crap that they were saying, we would do everything it took to just center and educate and understand ourselves. And there was 3 questions that I had to ask myself. How did I wake up one day with the capabilities of doing what I did? It didn't start in a vacuum. I led myself and grew into that person. And so I had to recognize the triggers and the influence in my life that caused me to become that person. And then once I was inside, what am I doing to retrain my thoughts, And it took me over 40 years of my life to understand the difference between emotional thoughts and rational thoughts, of reacting and responding and coming up with a strategy for life as opposed to just winging it. And then I had to ask myself, what am I going to do on the outside of this place to make sure that I never hurt nobody again, including myself? And so it is the reconditioning of the mind and really sitting with it. And this goes all the way back to the beginning of our discussion, and that is the purification of oneself.
You know, one of the books that I found most difficult and most heartbreaking, yet most revealing for me to read, was a simple little packet. It was a simple little book, and it's called the Willie Lynch Letters, right? I remember this brother gave me this book, and it was this little bitty simple book, a little pamphlet, and I began to read this book, and I started seeing my neighborhoods. I started seeing my family structure. I started seeing these things, and I started seeing it. I started seeing the institutional structure, right? And how I was training myself to respond. Because, you know, like William said, at a certain point, I was willing to chew my own leg off to get out. Because I understood my responsibility to my children and to my family. I had some information that I needed to get to them, but the way that the structure had set up, it made my voice mute to them. And not because they didn't love me, but because I didn't bring nothing to the table that they thought was tangible. And in 2017, I was denied parole because I wrote a poem called Black Lives Matter. And they said that that was me promoting violence. I wrote a poem called Black Lives Matter, and they denied me 3 years in 2017. I got blessed to come back a year early after 1 year, but I was denied parole for writing a poem called Black Lives Matter.
God. Okay, we are at an hour, and I want to open up to some. We had some great questions. I have lots of ideas forming about what we could do coming out of this, but I want to give space to Tim. I think Lou is going to unmute you now, Tim.
Hi there. I wanted to ask, I basically heard of the racist system being described as a compounding of these three axes of bigotry and capitalism and colonialism. So, and that, you know, altogether that creates our system, and then it becomes habitual and normalized and ubiquitous that there's just abuse that's occurring over and over again. And I guess the question that I want to ask is how we can kind of listen to each other and be able to spread openness to questioning each of these main elements, like those, you know, bigotry and capitalism and colonialism, so that we can build greater solidarity as an intersectional movement. Because I guess it's like different people have different blocks about each of these questions, and it almost seems like they almost interrelate to this whole issue of the misuse of power and the blindness to it.
I'd like to just say a brief statement, comment about that. I appreciate your question, Tim. And I recall, like, I discovered one day that that your beliefs were not threatening to me. That I had a choice. I did not have to be invaded by what you had to say. But and it made it easier for me to listen to what you had to say and to form questions to help you understand what you're really saying and expressing to me by reflecting it back to you as we communicated. But I first had to have enough confidence in my own ability to know where you ended and I began. And so when I understood where you ended and I began, I've allowed myself to be open-minded enough to accept your beliefs as they were, but wise enough to be able to ask you questions about what you believe. I believe that the truth can handle a question. It's lies that crumble with questioning. So the beliefs that I held that were lies, I needed to reveal them and expose them to questioning. But what I had done and what we have done as a society is we just surround ourselves with those who don't question our beliefs. Those who don't ask us anything that is counter to what we think, right? Because we're thinking that if I do, then what you believe is going to invade my mind. That's absurd. That's insane. It's not going to invade my mind. It's going to expose me to my weaknesses in my thinking. And it's going to expose you to the weaknesses in your thinking that no longer work for any of us. So what I think our best course of action is learn to accept that your beliefs are yours, but you can expose yours to the light of day. Like I need to expose mine to the light of day, because nothing diseased can live in the light.
Nice.
If you go into this process thinking that you know everything, if you go into this process thinking that, like we started off, that white supremacy hasn't filtered into you, and that your thoughts are based on structural institutions that's been around for hundreds of years and have perfected the ability to train your mind into thinking that your thought is right, then that's the first problem that we started off the show with. Like, you have to start questioning everything that you know, everything that you believe to be true. I mean, from God to the devil to your bicycle. Tuck bike is good though, tuck folds and all that, so we ain't worried about the tuck bike. But we talking about all these we talking about all these apparatuses that's getting you from one place to another in your life. You have to question them. And then this may take decades. This may take your lifetime. That's why we have already said this isn't tomorrow, the next election cycle. This is generational. It may take 40 years.
Absolutely. I think the thing that I struggled with the most was kind of seeing bigotry as like an abstraction as opposed to a specific cultural experience of racism towards particular groups specifically, and then having to really understand that as a story and be able to connect to that story by listening. And that made a difference for me, because before it's just like you see it as, if you just see it as a system, then you actually lose touch with that it's people and it's all of us together.
Yeah, and so I work for an organization called All of Us or None, and that's the message that I'm sending out now. It's all of us or none, but that doesn't say that I have to live with you. Like, we don't have to live in the same community. We can have differences, like our cultural differences, our language differences, our historical differences. That isn't wrong. You know, to be different. There's a passage in the Quran that says, we created you into nations and the tribes so that you may get to know each other, not to despise each other. So if your difference makes you hate me, if your differences bring out some pain in you, then this needs questioning. Because if I haven't done anything to you, why should you even have an ounce of hate or pain from me? And that's what we live under every day as those who are called Black. We know that the worst thing to be is in the imagination of a white man, because the things that he imagined about Black men are horrific. And we try every day to make his imagination that of Alice in Wonderland. Like, hey, I'm all good, man. I'm with you. And that's part of the problem. When I got out of prison and I was in the transitional house, I had all these parolees just like, oh, great. How can I help? How can I be a part of your program? This program is locking you up. This program is making money off of you. This program is causing us pain and suffering. Why can't we say, hey, I disagree with this and this policy, but I'll help you with this? When I went to GO at 111 Taylor Street, the second day I was out, I was bridging gaps between the chief of police and youth organizations. And they asked me to speak at the end to wrap it all up and summarize, where do we go from here? But when I went back to GO, who took me there, I said, I'm not down with that. I'm not down with that. I'm not down with that. And I'm not going to kiss your ass to make you feel like I'm cool with it while you give me this space and time to grow and develop into what? So you have to question your institutions of racism, because if you don't, you're implicit to it. And so there was these guys who have gone through the same struggle that I went through and looked at me as part of the problem. And I said, it's okay. I understand. You know, not everybody is going to reach the point of wokeness and consciousness at the same time. So we have to be inclusive of those who are still sick and help them heal. You know, and that's what all great leaders who ever walked this earth did. All great leaders, and one of my greatest leaders today is Leslie Currier of Marin Shakespeare Company. When I saw her masterfully control the attitudes and personalities of people in prison in order to create a play, I was in just awe. I need that skill set. I need to be able to tap into people who are resistant, who don't know how to study and learn lines, who don't know how to know their place on stage, like all these intricate details that she was able to do. And so I want to give thanks to even like the Embassy Network, the Embassy, like when they invited me to a table when I first got out to meet all the people that was at this table and discussing topics. This was like a prototype of how I see the future. And I know you had your internal problems, we all do, right? But the premise of it was real. All of these people from all different backgrounds was able to come to this table and relate because we were just talking truths. So I hope I didn't go on too much and miss the mark, but
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
This conversation
Yeah.
is ongoing.
That's right. Yeah, I think there's something, yeah, you're right. That, the embassy table is an interesting thing because you just do not know who you're sitting next to ever, and that's very powerful. Like
It
it's an
is.
intimidating table, but you just have no idea who the next person is, and that's like something like extraordinary. I really value because you sort of leave all your sort of like cultural exoskeleton at the door, and that's really really nice. Okay, I think that leads us nicely into Erica's question about institutions. I think Lou's going to
Yes.
unmute you.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear us over here?
Oh, it's Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah, great talk. Thanks, everyone. So William and Michael have talked about changing people's minds and personal views. How do we change our institutions? Like, we can go and vote. I can't vote because I'm on a green card, but and other people can't vote because they're, what's the word?
Not allowed?
The formerly incarcerated people sometimes, in some states, are not allowed to vote as well.
Right.
So we can like change DAs. That makes like a tangible difference on like the DA chooses who to prosecute, blah, blah, blah. But we could vote in the Democrats. But like, as William said, like, or was it Mike said, Obama did some stuff that wasn't great. And the Clintons, or sorry, Bill Clinton, because it's him in office, Bill Clinton had like the 3-strike system. So we've kind of pragmatically only got 2 parties to choose from. How do we change our other institutions?
So I think just like I think William has mentioned a couple of times, this isn't a sprint. It's going to be a marathon. And so I think that just continuing to create the awareness. These institutions have been created. They're systems that have built the institutions to maintain themselves. As these systems are more exposed, then the institutions will be exposed. And so as they're exposed, then therein lies that the opportunities that will cause them to be restructured and redeveloped. I believe that there was a time in my life where I needed to be taken away from society to face myself. It blessed me. I know that one of my intentions, one of my goals is to create an alternative to incarceration. I want to create an institution that is an alternative to incarceration, that actually brings an individual who may be suffering, who needs to be reconnected to himself so that he can be reconnected to community, but I might need to isolate him from community for a while so that we can work with him on a more one-on-one basis, as well as we work with his family to help restructure their thinking, because they may be in need of healing in some area, to help them rebuild their connection to themselves and to society. And so as we create these types of structures and organizations, we replace those old structures. We replace them with something new. But until we create something new, then those institutions will continue to stand until we can create something new. And those of us who are woke will have to step up and begin to create these new organizations or agencies or services to help provide the healing that those in our community may need. And we have so many other ways, so many other institutions, not just prison system, but we have other systems that are completely broken that need to be dismantled. The juvenile system, for example, is something that needs to be completely obliterated, right? Because that system, even the child welfare system, the CPS system, is a system that feeds into the juvenile system. One of the things that I've been doing is professional development training for the school districts, because I know that the teachers are the ushers into the prison system. Just like if you go to church, you have an usher that might walk you to your seat. while our school teachers have inadvertently become the ushers that usher our children into the prison system with their method of educating and disciplining. And so we have to really take a look at all these things, but it's going to be a marathon and not a sprint.
William, do you have anything to add, or I want to make a comment on the institutions?
Go ahead and add your say your thoughts.
Yeah, I think so. I think none of the political parties that we have are anywhere near good enough, right? These are just like, would you rather chop off your arm or your leg? There's your choice. You know, it's just like, and so you know, I think a lot of the work that our collective has been doing since this sort of like the world started melting 3 months ago has been to think about like, how do we create new institutions? And you know, like much of the sort of work in our community is about exploring new institutions, right? New forms of home, new forms of domesticity, new forms of justice, new forms of community, different kinds of solidarity. And I think what we are starting to see is that, you know, you try these things and then they sort of start to spread and they sort of like formalize and they turn into things. And then there's a sort of nice, I can't remember whose theory of like societal transformation this is, but the sort of idea is that society goes through sort of stable modes and then external things happen that cause some sort of like chaos. And in that chaos, you know, seeds are sort of sown, but they have, those seeds of new societies have to be there. And so there's been, you know, many versions of this over history. And I think my worry is that we haven't grown the seeds. So we have absolute chaos right now. So I think, you know, in lots of ways for our sort of economic system, we've got like all sorts of interesting complementary currencies and, you know, experiments into the commons and things like that. But I worry that our post sort of racial utopias, we don't have the seeds and we need them, you know? And so my hope is that something comes out of this, which is that, you know, in some way we form groups of people who like are down to get together and do the collective cognitive behavioral therapy to fucking change as a society, so that the institutions we build have the values we want in them, because these institutions are just the outcome of us, you know. And so I think Micah and William's points about changing ourselves and then changing our relationships, and then the next comes the institutions, but we do have to build them, you know, we have to experiment. And I think just leaning into what we have, our education system, and all these sort of like status quo modes it's going to be very difficult for us to escape, I think, if we just use the sort of current institutions that we have. Okay, next question.
So,
go ahead.
We are already building new institutions. We have people who build charter schools and take their kids out of public schools and put them in charter schools. We have people who have nonprofit organizations who help people on parole like myself, instead of relying on the parole department. We already have institutions in place to start patronizing, right? We just don't. We ignore them. We say, oh, you're out of the system, or I can't trust that. So the process of building new institutions is just building them and stop frequenting those who are part of white supremacy. So put your dollar where your mouth is. Like, stop putting it into institutions that you know are built and founded on white supremacy. And that's how it happened. Stop voting for Republicans and Democrats. Let's seriously get minds together who knows how to create the Labor Party of Love and put it on the ballot and start locally. Right where you're at, first in your house, building the institution in your mind, and then spreading it out into your cities and neighborhoods and grocery stores. I'm not frequenting your grocery stores. I'll go a couple more blocks across the freeway in order to shop at a grocery store who are supporting and putting their dollars into our new institutions. That's how you build institutions, like doing it. When you see there's a problem and that person or that institution is actively participating in white supremacy, put it on social media. I'm blocking this. I ask everybody here today, no longer refer to yourself as a color. When somebody asks you what your race is on an application or in person or whatever, put human. Let's let that be the first institution that we start, the human institution, and let that go global. And after that, you'll start to see their institutions crumbling. Because if it's built on people who are white showing up at the door, because there's a lot of black people who could sound white on the phone. Be like, hi, can I help you with this? Hey, can I get that? Sure. So we can pass on phones, and I'm kidding, but because I want to keep it light at the same time. But it is as serious as it is. It's still as easy as it is by being human.
Absolutely. And we have to be prepared for the discomfort that may show up as a result of making these types of a shift. I remember being in prison, and there were a couple of up and coming package companies, right? Quarterly package companies that wanted to establish themselves. And I used to observe these things. And one of them, they had a few correctional officers who had retired to open up a package company so that they can make the money from the population by selling the goods to us. Then you had a couple of inmate families who had opened up their package company, and they wanted to make the money off the goods. And so what the officer would do that was in R&R who passed out the package, the packages that came from the family or that was connected to the inmate population, they would always give you a lot of hard time. It would take longer to get that package. It would be a little bit longer, and when you got it, something was going to be busted inside of there, right? And no one knew what was happening at first, but I eventually started studying it and watching it. I'm curious like that. And the officers who had opened up their package company, their advertisement, their flyers, the officer, the package guy would pass out and say, man, well, these guys, they deliver real fast, You're going to get your package early, and I ain't never had nothing that's broke inside of there. So they're really working to establish that. But this up and coming one, they would eventually fizzle out and they would die because the population didn't see what the trick was, right? We didn't see what the trick was. And so when we get ready to make a shift like that, we have to be ready to endure the hardships that's going to come with it. When we take that extra couple of blocks, we have to be willing to endure things like that in order to put our money where our mouth is,
Yeah. I want to do a whole session on this sort of idea of not identifying as anything. So I'm definitely just going to flag that we're going to do a whole session on that. I think the next question was Mary.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Hi, there we are. I'm Mary. So my question is, how can we become more gracious about allowing ourselves to rest when our systems and society continue to perpetuate this busy culture, especially in activism. I know I've been really struggling hard with feeling guilty if I take pause or if I'm just exhausted, and I feel extremely guilty for not taking time for my own self-care. I just got done with a session with the group Check Your Privilege, run by Maisha Hill. And they were talking about how rest is resistance in activism, and taking care of ourselves is important. But I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that.
I don't know that you two are two of the busiest people I know.
So for myself, I don't require as much rest as the average person. I accept that, right? While I was in prison, I had guards that worked on different shifts, and they they got curious because none of them ever seen me sleep. I didn't want them to see me sleep. I removed the mattress from my bed. I didn't sleep on a mattress for 22 years because I didn't want to be comfortable. I knew that I wasn't at home, and I didn't want to live like I was at home. And so for me, when I think about self-care, I have a friend of mine who is a friend/therapist who, her name is Dr. Cheryl. She's a phenomenal woman. And she talks to me a lot about self-care. And so I spend time with making sure that I do some things for self-care, just for me to relax. But I don't require the amount of rest. I don't let society tell me when I should stop anymore. My motto is I'm gonna rest when I'm dead. And so for right now, the light of day is up. It's important for me to work. But I do make sure that I do things that are feeding my spirit, and that are feeding my spirit. I make sure that I develop relationships that are very easy for me to be in. And what I mean by easy is that I have some relationships that are close around me that I trust, so that I don't believe in that ideology of, keep your friends close, your enemies closer. No, that would make me paranoid. And so I usually surround myself, my closest circle is those people that I could, excuse me, y'all, where I can pull my tooth out. And I try to keep people around me that can accept me like this without my partial in my mouth. And it gives me something that, to where I have a peace. And that is my self-care. And excuse me for a second. That is my self-care. And so when I'm able to do that, I get a full body breathe. I get a belly breathe. I get a mental rest. I get a state where I'm not exhausted. And when I need a little bit extra, I take a drive, or I go fishing, or I work at a law office where I'm blessed to have a river behind the house, and my bosses come into the office and say, "Hey, Mike, you need to go out there and get in that kayak." And I'll say, "Okay." And I'll go and I'll get in the kayak, and that's me just floating, And so that is my self-care. That is my time away from myself. I do those types of things, but to me, it's not about taking these moments. It's about creating a lifestyle that not only allows me to work, but rest within it. It's like it's locked in the process. My lifestyle has that woven in there. So I don't have to do anything extra to get to it. It's just in there. At 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, most people, I won't answer the phone for them. Except, there's some people that can call. If Zarina called me at 11:30, I'm answering, because I know that she knows that she wouldn't call if there wasn't something that was important. But it's locked in the lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. William, you have thoughts? I have some thoughts I can add.
No, I'm gonna take a quick break. And
okay, take a quick break. Yeah, I'll say, my what would I say? Yeah, so I hear this often in activist groups. The urgency feels overwhelming, and so on and so forth. And I think something we've been working on in our collective recently is like two things. One, trying to get away from growth mindset, and that we have to do better today than we did yesterday, and and I think a lot of this is internalized elements of capitalism, and going back to are we ready to be in the world we're trying to create? I think if we take that mindset with us, the answer is no. And so maybe you can give yourself permission through that mechanism to be like, I have to be a whole, healed, okay person if I'm going to show up well. And the other is that, I think our society doesn't value a ton of the ways that we show up. And when you're at home doing your plants and taking care of your cat, that is value. Just because our world doesn't value that, it is value. You being an okay and well human is creating value. And I think if we want to build and create another world, we have to embody that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is exactly what they were talking about in the webinar, and allowing yourself grace and okay to unlearn what society has put on us as being prideful of being busy, rather than being prideful of taking time to really make sure we're showing up for ourselves so we can show up for everyone else. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yay. Okay. Well, we've got one last. We should probably let everyone get on with their lives, but I think we have from Alex. Is that a question or a comment? Just a comment. Just a comment. Great. That's lovely. Oh, Amanda, did you have your hand up? I can't see any other questions, but I might be missing. Go for it. Lou, can you unmute Amanda?
Am I here? Yeah, I didn't type it in advance. I'm just curious if we're winding up. How do we maybe I'm the only one who doesn't already know this, but yeah, how do we stay in touch with this work, with the, you know, restorative justice work, with how to, I mean, I'm on the bandwagon now, so like, what do we do to keep keeping a part of it?
I think you can join the Beyond Return Facebook group, or just stay in touch with me, and I'll keep posting. I think it's likely that these I think our next one of these is Friday. Is that right, Lou? Yeah. And the sort of rough idea is to continue sort of diverse futurisms. I would like to keep the theme along race for this like set of events. So the sort of plan I had was to do one on really mixed identity race people, and how the world is to them, and the sort of like challenges and benefits to being sort of unidentifiable or not fitting in, and being in liminal identity spaces. I think Lou's put the Beyond Return Facebook group. So yeah, that is where the sort of like, this is the sort of engine that is coordinating many things that include the restorative justice and transformative justice stuff. Second Life, which is how I know William and Michael. Yeah, so you can do that, or you can, if you're not a Facebook person, there's an email list that I will make sure that everything goes to. That's not very helpful. Let me put my email address in there.
At any point, at any time, anyone ever needed to know anything more about some of the things that I'm doing, feel free to contact Zarina, and Zarina can give you my email or my number, and feel free to contact me. I am heavily involved in a lot of restorative justice work. I'm a restorative justice practitioner, and I believe that it is something that is necessary for us moving forward, that we all become more aware of restorative justice. Because one of the key components of restorative justice is that when there's going to be conflict in relationships, when we interact, there's an inability for us not to have a conflict. We're going to have that. The main thing that restorative justice does is say, okay, what should happen next? And whatever that answer is, if it doesn't re-strengthen and build the relationship, if it doesn't not expose any of the parties to any more harm or any more danger, then we don't do it, because it's not going to restore. Justice is supposed to restore relationships. And if our method of doing justice in any situation doesn't restore a relationship, then it's not justice at all. And we need to stop calling it that. There's so many terms that we need to take back that have been misused and misappropriated. And we need to just take these terms back, because they have not been used properly. And we need to tell the justice system to stop using that term. That's not what justice is.
Yeah. Yeah, I can vouch for Mike's restorative justice skills. Like, I think within about 30 seconds of meeting you, I was in tears. Do you remember that? Really great skills. And I think, something I would love to see come out of these groups, and maybe this doesn't resonate for everybody, but is a sort of collective support circle working group where we come together to do restorative justice on ourselves as a collective, and to sort of like see what that feels like to be a group of like whatever it is, 20 people, 15 people that meet once a week or once a month, and like try and like deal with the feelings of what it feels like to live in this system and figure out how to be better. And in doing so, I think build like relationships and bonds and stuff like that. So if anyone's interested in that, let me know. Yeah, great. So I'll let Lou's can talk about the recording.
Yeah, I just wanted to add up a bit on like the follow-up and how people can plug in. But yeah, I also want to take this opportunity to thank both our speaker. It was really amazing, and it was such a good discussion, and I'm very excited for more. And okay, so more, how are we gonna do this? This is the beginning. But the goal would be that we would have several of these, so stay in touch. we're gonna use the Facebook group for now, and like I guess the Beyond Return mailing list if you want to subscribe to this, and we'll put the salon there. Maybe at some point we'll like have a special page with a schedule and things like this. If you have ideas of topics, or if you yourself would like to participate in such a discussion, please email Zarina and I. We put our email addresses in the chat. This recording I will edit because like or you know there are parts that at the beginning when we started, when not everyone was on it and everything, so clean it up, and then I'll put it on YouTube, and I'll post it in this event, and yeah, if you will also share the video same via the Facebook group and Beyond Return, and we'll build on more, and it's going to be a weekly thing, and hopefully become even more than this. And if you have any feedback or think about ways we can make this better, or like you know, if you have burning desire for I don't know, a platform like Google Docs and things like this, or if you want to help, you can yeah, send us an email, and we want to make this as participative as possible, right? Like we're definitely not here to lead the thing, and we want everyone to really like create this community and these discussions.
All right, great.
That's it.
Lou and Zarina, I want to share a spoken word piece that I put together. It's kind of I actually wrote it while I was on the inside, and I was upset about some things, and this is what came out. If you don't mind, it's called "Did You Know?" Did you know? It really wasn't that long ago when hoses and dogs were sicked on us. You know that to be me meant that I wasn't whole, or so the story is told. 3/5 of a man said I shouldn't be able to sit or stand, let alone shake the hand of a white man. Even used the Bible, twisted and distorted, for slaves to be imported and extorted. Now others live in fear of being escorted and then deported. I just want us all to know that it really hasn't been that long ago. So you better not go to sleep and let Jim Crow creep, creep, creep. Them values and some run way deep, deep, deep. They just might be blind to the fact that the color of our skin determines how they react. Talking about justice is blind. Man, that's a fabrication of their mind. You know they're doggone well that they can't stand to see us shine. From what I see, justice got on ultraviolet glasses designed to help hunt down our black and brown asses. Give us lashes and lock us up in masses. Many get annihilated through prisons, being tricked into divisions, while others get exterminated on the streets. It's like there's a quota to meet. This venomous lion that they call justice simply loves to eat black and brown meat, trying to silence our toe-tapping feet. You better open your eyes and take a peek.
Wow. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Do you have a link to, or where could we find it?
What this? I don't. I haven't published it. This is the first time. I mean, I've spoken it before, but now it's published right here. Right?
Yeah, debut.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I will endeavour to nudge Mike to write it down somewhere and share it with the group, because it's very beautiful.
I will. I'll make sure that I'll do that. I'll scan it to you tomorrow.
Okay.
I don't think there could have been like a more perfect closing to this discussion. So I don't think we can say anything after this.
That's right. I'll say thank you for coming. Hope to see you at the next one. Let's keep it going. Let's change together. And I feel pretty confident that we can build something beautiful together. Thank you, William. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much.
He's say farewell right now. I know that he would want to say goodbye, but he just wants to say farewell. And so
Okay.
See you next time.
All right, bye team.
See you next time. Thank you.
So.
I'm sorry. Bye.
Bye.